Hey, coaches. So today we are finally getting into one of the most important skill sets and set of resources that you can bring into your coaching as you step into corporate work. And that is, how do you help a client work through difficult, challenging conversations? All of the stuff you've done before this point in terms of your coaching work, the ability to leverage those coaching skills in a session, you bring those skills into these difficult conversations around difficult conversations. And by the way, that's probably one of the most confusing parts of having coaching sessions around communication, is because at least I frequently get confused and cause confusion for my client on which conversation are we talking about, today's right now or the one with my boss. It's a bit of an aside. But this is going to be one of the main things that you talk to your clients about. It comes up in every coaching agreement that I've been a part of over an extended period of time. I need this. I have this conversation with an interviewer, with a boss, skip level manager, whoever it might be, and I need to prepare. And this is the difficult part of that preparation. The nice thing is that while every client is going to have their own take on the challenge of communication, we are human beings and we are great at making communication one of the most difficult parts of our work and our lives. So today we're going to be talking about patterns, 6 common agendas around communication. Now it's not an exhaustive list, but it's the main ones. There's a lot of patterns around what is going on with this individual, this relationship, this level of leadership, and the difficulty I have in communicating to them. So let's dive into these types, and then we'll talk about the process you can walk through on all of these types of agendas to support the exploration and growth in terms of preparing for that difficult conversation. First, I've had plenty of times where an individual who finds themselves more introverted, someone who is less familiar with having conversations in general, that they would like to focus the coaching on their ability to connect, their ability to communicate. To be a bit stereotypical, it is more common, I should say, with those in an engineering space. And I don't know if that's because of the personality or because of the cultural way the engineer is supposed to behave, in a way. Like it's a bit of a stereotype, right? That the engineer is not able to communicate. That's not true for every engineer I've worked with. But I do find this to be a bit more of an agenda for that type of individual in a company. This person tends to want the coach to help them be more relaxed in a natural setting, getting to know their peers, their other coworkers. They might have gotten some 360 feedback or feedback from the manager that they seem a bit cold, standoffish, disconnected from the team, and they'd like them to engage a bit more and feel a little bit more welcome and help others feel welcome at the company. It can be very challenging to be asked to do that when the client, if you were that client, if you just felt like, this is not who I am. I'm not the person who likes to have useless conversations. And oftentimes that area of weakness will be talked about in a morally negative sense. I don't want to waste time or waste anyone else's time by talking about non-work stuff. But this is something that they will often bring to the table as they get the feedback from their team and managers. Now, the second type of common communication agenda is, how do I prepare for a difficult conversation with my manager or skip level manager? Now, there's a few extra caveats, a few extra considerations for this kind of communication coaching. When coaching someone with their manager, skip level manager in mind, we do need to get a little bit of the details on the relationship. We can still ask them in exploratory ways, but the coach needs to understand, in what way should we support this client in preparing for a difficult conversation? How welcome do you feel with this manager? What is your relationship like with this manager? What do you find to be the most challenging aspect of this relationship, and so on? How safe do you feel with this manager? And as you're talking, there might actually be indicators that there is an abusiveness that is going on. In those cases, you need to do the ethical thing and highlight this for the client. Now, I know it's difficult to just, and maybe, I don't know, I don't want to take a firm stance on it. It's difficult, though, to tell them, hey, you need to reach out to HR, because every company's different and the sense of safety an individual has even with their HR department, it's not the consistent. And yeah, there's plenty of bad stories about going to HR and bad stories about not going to HR. Your work is to highlight a poor situation as a mirror based on what you've heard and say, this sounds like abuse, and I would encourage you to work with someone who will be able to help you. Who might that be? I tend to highlight HR as an option, but I also ask them what their sense is there. If there is an additional, not only abusive, abusive relationally, but abusive in a dangerous way, then we need to up the ante and go towards a crisis mentality. If there's unethical things going on, we need to make the ethical decision as a coach and make referrals, point to the legal course of action for the individual, and to encourage them to get to safety. That is going to be very rare, but it is a bit of a possibility when it comes to manager and skip level manager work. So with that out of the way, in preparing for a difficult conversation with that kind of individual, we help the coach, or we help the client to better understand what they want to say and how to best say it. And we'll talk about that process in a bit. But those are the additional little considerations for coaching around managers and skip level managers. Number 3, executive and high stakes presentations. This could be executives, this could be sales, it could be just generally communicating to the company. Presentations provide an opportunity to dig into communication, but you have that one-to-many aspect where your client is going to be offering their speaking skills to a wider group, and the majority of the coaching sessions I've had around this are towards an executive team, towards a board, towards a leadership group. So this individual feels scared to show up, and when they consider themselves as a presenter in that group of elites, in that group of those at the very top of the company, in that group of those who scare them at the very least, then they don't see themselves as worthy, they don't see themselves as prepared or skilled enough or important enough to share something of value in that setting. There's additional things that we can look at with these types of presentation agendas, but the process that we'll look at today will still help. And as with all of these relationships and agendas that come up, general coaching principles do help in preparing for those kinds of conversations. But presentation is a little bit off to the side. It is challenging, and oftentimes it's with that upper level leadership that it's a bit more scary to them. Number 4, difficult peer relationships where there's conflict. Again, there could be some ethical things that come up, and the go-to person might be, again, manager, skip level manager, HR. It really depends on the nature of things. But aside from ethical challenges, this is a common agenda where the client is having a bit of a rough time communicating and working with their peer. Number 5, interviews. When this client is going to be making a career transition, looking for promotion, and they need to have an internal interview, whatever it might be, they want to feel prepared, and this will oftentimes include, how do I prepare to have a conversation with someone I've never met before? So you might coach around the communication, but you also might build a strategy for bridging the gap between where the client is here to making the interview a little bit less of a cold call, if possible. Again, general coaching principles can be very helpful, but the process we'll look at to support a client in preparing for an interview will also help. And then finally, I want to do better in my personal conversations, my personal relationship with my children, my spouse, with my parents, with my friends. It's very similar to the very first one we mentioned. And it's important to help this client to understand what they really want, what's getting in the way, and so on, so that they can build a plan, they can get some practice to improve the relationship. This might be a bit scarier for a coach to do because they feel as if this is stepping outside of the domain of corporate coaching, executive coaching, business coaching, professional coaching. But what happens outside of work is still very important to what happens inside of work. And I've had plenty of examples where one's personal relationships and the challenges they were facing with their family conversations was making an impact on their work. You may have to make a referral to therapy in these kinds of cases, but oftentimes, in my experience, these are just generally, I want to do better. Can we talk about it? And there weren't any especially strong red flags or orange flags or anything. It's just, okay, this is a tough relationship for them at this point. And as we coached, they were able to make decisions and practice things and see improvement. When helping someone in these personal communication challenges, it's also very helpful to highlight any learning they gained there and ask questions about how this might apply to their work. Same can be true for work conversations, but I think it's especially true as a corporate coach or an executive coach to ask the clients working on their personal lives what they're learning, how what they're learning might be able to support them at work as well. Now that we've looked at these common agendas, now let's take a look at a sample process or framework we can use to support a client in any of these types of communication challenges. Now, with any kind of framework, it's always important to stress that you don't have to go through these step by step. None of these is meant to be explored by just one question each. These are just general steps a coach can take to support a client to thoroughly explore the nature of the communication challenge and their way forward. So let's start by looking at the goal. The goal in this case is going to be the overall goal. What is your goal in terms of your relationship with your peers? What kind of relationship do you want to have with your manager? As you think about that presentation, what do you want that to lead to over the next few months? What impact would you like it to make in the longer term? And so on. So just help them set themselves into this space a little bit less tactically for a moment, to take a look back, to take a step back and take a look at the big picture. Why is this so important to them? This should be a part of the agenda setting to a degree, but if you feel like you could go a little bit deeper, it's valuable to step into that deeper understanding as part of setting the stage for coaching around difficult, important conversations. Next, we have the example or the specific intent of the actual conversation. So you want your relationship with this peer to improve because it's going to make you both be able to have better work outputs, be able to hit your KPIs or OKRs more effectively for each quarter. There's all these benefits. If I have a better relationship with my peer, that's the goal. But my intent from my next conversation with that person gets more specific. It does go tactical, but it's still internal. What's my intent? What do I want to happen in that conversation? How do I want that person to see me? What's the outcome I hope will come from this, so that we are having a better relationship next week, and if we have that better relationship, this will happen over the next week, and so on. So help them describe their intent for that specific conversation so that you can continue to move them forward while keeping an eye on the bigger picture and the inner picture. Number 3, what is the specific challenge? What is the obstacle? What is getting in the way of that 1-year view, 6-month view, or whatever it is, the goal? And what might trip them up as they prepare for that one conversation, or as they imagine having that conversation? What might get in the way? As you imagine having that interview and wanting to go in there with boldness and confidence and clarity, what is the challenge in making that a reality for you? And so on. This is, again, very common general coaching principles, but this structure helps go from the broad, important, internal intent down to what's the problem in a way, like what's getting in the way, what's the obstacle, so that we can really work on that. We're not looking to problem solve, but we are looking to work through that problem in the grander context of this client's growth and development. Number 4, we want to help the client identify the language they would like to use. And this is something we address with that role play video that's also part of the session. What do you want to say? How do you want to say it? How do you want to come across? What's the most important thing that you want them to hear? And so on. These kinds of questions help get, in many ways, like the pen to paper. You help them vocalize what's in their hearts. You help them go down to their hearts so that they are more able to focus on the actual words they want to say to get to the goal they want to reach towards. And we look at this a little bit more with crucial conversations in a later training session. But it is important to start with heart, according to crucial conversations. Start with the goal, the intent, the challenge, and now we start looking at language instead of starting by saying, "So what do you want to say to them?" Because sometimes you'll get an earful of cussing, as we say in the South. Number 5, what behavior do they want to demonstrate? As you speak these things, how do you want to hold yourself? Or if you're doing a role play, highlight behaviors you are seeing in the moment and ask the client what behaviors they want to demonstrate. Because if they're doing the role play and I think I did this in another video, but if they're doing a role play and they're rubbing their face, they're holding their neck, they're they're picking up their coffee cup over and over again, they're tapping the desk, whatever it might be, highlight those things. Even if it's a bit of a nervous twitch, help them reflect on those behaviors as part of how they might come across in the conversation. You might even tie the behavior to the desired intent and the language. As you communicate with holding of the neck, what do you think that does to the way this other person may see you in the moment and hear you in the moment? And what would you like to do otherwise? What behavior would help you demonstrate that confidence more effectively? And so on. Next, we have support. So while we can do so much in the coaching session, role play and coach through everything, make a plan, this individual also can use some coaching around what support structures they can put into place to support them in preparation for or during that conversation. In a presentation, the support might be seating an individual who will be someone with a smile. I found this very helpful to know I can look at someone who's smiling at me during a presentation so all my energy isn't sapped by someone who's distracted during the presentation. In an executive meeting, it could be really reaching out to that executive sponsor who is there to support you. And you can look to them from time to time in the presentation to recharge your batteries as you give that presentation. If we're talking about a skip level manager, or a peer relationship, the support person might be someone in your family. It might be someone at work. We're not necessarily you're not talking behind the individual's back, but you are sharing your intention. You're sharing what you want for that relationship, and you might do some practice. So if you are wanting to work more effectively with your skip level manager, talk to your manager or help the client talk to their manager, describe the goal, the intent, what they want to say. They might ask to do a bit of a practice run with their manager and get some feedback. And naturally in that space, it would be natural to get some encouragement at the same time. Not every manager will, not every peer will, whoever it is, but it's good to have a plan around who else is supporting the client as they try to do better with their communication. And then finally, we have practice. Now, this is separate from the practice we do in session. This is practice that they go on to do outside of session. How will they hold themselves accountable? By practicing as they prepare for that difficult conversation. You might set up 1 or 2 extra sessions just to do the practice. But again, as they look at who's going to support them, how will they practice with that person? Or how will they practice by recording themselves? And so on. Help them to thoroughly think about how they want to practice and how they can practice what they want to remember. And as a whole, with the entire process of coaching around communication, that sense of what do I want to remember while I am there is a very important aspect of the action and planning, the closing of the coaching session, the closing of this framework. Help the client to thoroughly consider what it is they need to bring mentally into that conversation so that they are emotionally prepared for it. What do you want to tell yourself? What do you want to remember as you step into that conversation, into the room, onto the stage? There's a lot here. I would encourage you to review it and check out the resource that we have here to guide the process for supporting communication conversations. This is the backbone of your coaching. This is maybe I should say, this is just going to be a very common thing you support. So use this process to help, and use your natural coaching abilities that you've been cultivating over the past few months to help you bridge the gap between where they are now and where they want to be in that challenging conversation. This helps the client grow in their ability to act humanly to their team, to their manager, to an interviewer, and so on, and can have huge transformational potential and impact as they see themselves grow in this area where they told themselves, this relationship, this presentation, it will just never be great. And they see things change because of the work that you do with them. So thank you so much for being willing to do that work, and thank you so much for growing as a coach.